Sarah Thompson sighed deeply as she gazed out the kitchen window. She had just turned 38, and while she should still feel young, today she felt terribly tired. Outside, her 10-year-old daughter Emily was playing basketball with her husband Michael. Sarah smiled at the sight. "Mom, watch this." Emily's voice rang out. She dodged her father and scored. Michael was 40, but when playing with his daughter, he seemed to turn back into a boy. Sarah took a sip of coffee before heading to the living room. There, her mother-in-law Martha was quietly watching TV. Martha, who had recently lost her husband George, seemed to be sinking into grief. "Martha, would you like some coffee?" Sarah asked gently. Martha nodded slightly. "Thank you, Sarah. You're always so thoughtful." Sarah sat down next to Martha as she handed her the coffee. "Were you thinking about George?" Martha answered with a distant look in her eyes. "Yes, I still can't get used to life without him. After more than 40 years together." Sarah gently squeezed her mother-in-law's hand. George's death had deeply affected the entire family. Martha, in particular, was struggling to overcome the grief of losing her husband. At that moment, Michael and Emily came into the house. "Mom, Grandma, look. I beat Dad," Emily reported happily. Michael laughed as he wiped away his sweat. "This kid's really gotten good. I'm no match for her anymore." As the family conversation continued, Sarah remembered tomorrow's plans. "Oh, that's right. We need to start sorting through George's belongings tomorrow." At those words, the room's atmosphere froze for a moment. Martha said in a small voice, "Yes, it's been a month already, hasn't it?" Michael, immersed in memories of his father, said, "Dad's room is still untouched. We need to sort it out." Emily asked curiously, "Are there a lot of Grandpa's mementos?" Sarah stroked her daughter's head as she answered, "I'm sure there are. Grandpa was the type to carefully keep all sorts of things." The family spent a quiet evening, each harboring their own thoughts about tomorrow's task of sorting through the belongings. The next morning, Sarah woke up early and started preparing breakfast. Today was the day to sort through her father-in-law George's belongings. It was a big job for the whole family to tackle. "Good morning, Mom." Emily appeared in the kitchen with a sleepy face. "Good morning, Emily. Did you sleep well?" Sarah asked as she handed her daughter a glass of orange juice. Emily answered while stretching big, "Yes, but I woke up too early. I'm curious about Grandpa's room." Soon after, Michael and Martha also woke up. While having breakfast, the family discussed today's plan. "Let's start with the study," Martha suggested. George spent a lot of time there. Everyone agreed, and they started working right after breakfast. When they entered George's study, books, documents, and mementos were crammed everywhere. "Wow, Grandpa had so many books," Emily exclaimed in admiration. Michael looked around the bookshelf nostalgically. Dad loved reading. The family divided up tasks and began sorting. Sarah was in charge of documents, Michael books, and Martha small items. Emily was assigned to organize the contents of her grandfather's desk drawers. About an hour into the work, Emily's voice suddenly rang out. "Hey, everyone! Look at this!" As the family turned around, Emily was holding a large leather-bound album. "It looks really old." Sarah walked over to her daughter. "Wow, what a beautiful album. It might have photos from when Grandpa was young." The whole family gathered around Emily and opened the album together. As they turned the yellowed pages, old black and white photos appeared one after another. "Oh, is this Martha?" Sarah pointed. The family smiled at the sight of a young Martha. As they turned the pages, Emily suddenly gasped. "Hey, is this me?" Sarah peered at the photo. There was indeed a girl who looked exactly like Emily. The same bright eyes, the same smile, and the same distinctive nose shape. But... Sarah looked at the back of the photo. There was a date written there. 1973. This photo is from 50 years ago. As the whole family gasped in surprise, Sarah looked at her mother-in-law. Martha's face had turned pale, and her body was trembling slightly. "Martha, are you okay?" Sarah asked worriedly. Martha, not taking her eyes off the photo, said in a thin voice, "I can't believe it's here." The family was confused, looking at each other's faces. Martha's unusual reaction changed the atmosphere in the room. What secret could be hidden in this old photo? As a heavy silence fell over the room, Martha's trembling hand reached for the photo. Her fingertips gently caressed the girl's face as if stroking it. "Martha, who is this girl?" Sarah asked quietly. Martha took a deep breath and slowly closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there was a look of determination in them. "This girl is my sister." Her name was Carol Harrison. Martha's voice was hoarse. "Sister?" Michael exclaimed in surprise. "Neither Dad nor you ever mentioned having a sister." Martha smiled sadly. "Yes, our family hasn't spoken about Carol for many years." Emily asked curiously, "Why? If she's Grandma's sister, wouldn't that make her my great-aunt?" Martha heaved a deep sigh. "Yes, Emily. But Carol is no longer in this world." Silence spread through the room again. Sarah placed her hand on her mother-in-law's shoulder and gently prompted, "Martha, would you like to tell us? Please, teach us." Martha slowly nodded. "Yes, there's no need to hide it anymore. Carol died in an accident in the summer of 1973. "An accident?" Michael asked quietly. Martha nodded slightly. "Yes, an accident at the lake. Since that day, our family stopped talking about Carol." "But why?" Sarah asked curiously. Martha answered, choosing her words carefully. "Back then, it was different from now. A tragedy in a small town quickly became gossip. My parents wanted to protect the family from those rumors. And I..." Her voice trailed off. "And you, Mom?" Michael prompted. Every time I remembered that accident, my chest would tighten. So I became afraid to talk about Carol. Tears glistened in Martha's eyes. Sarah gently squeezed her mother-in-law's hand. "Martha, it must have been a really painful experience." Emily, staring at the photo, said, "But she looks just like me." Martha smiled and replied, "Yes, you look very much alike. I guess blood will tell." Michael said with a confused expression, "But why all these years? Dad never mentioned having a sister either." "George understood how I felt," Martha explained. "He promised to wait until I was ready. But before that chance came." Her voice choked up. The family listened to Martha's story, perplexed by the suddenly revealed secret. The truth that had been hidden for many years was gradually coming to light. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Sarah, Michael, and Martha gathered in the living room. On the table lay the album they had found earlier that day. Martha slowly opened the album and gazed at Carol's photo. In the summer of 1973. We were spending our summer vacation at the lakeside cottage with our parents, as usual. Sarah and Michael listened quietly. Martha's voice trembled slightly, as if calling up distant memories. "Carol was 14, and I was 16, Martha continued. "That day was especially hot, so we decided to swim in the lake. Our parents had gone shopping in town, so we were alone." Martha took a deep breath and continued. "At first, it was fun. But then we started arguing." She closed her eyes, seemingly trying to face the painful memory. "What were you arguing about?" Michael asked quietly. Martha shook her head. "Now, it seems so trivial. I think it was about a boy. We had both fallen for the same boy." Her voice was tinged with regret. "I said something mean. Carol, crying, got into a boat alone and rowed out to the middle of the lake." Sarah gasped. "And then?" "Yes." Tears glistened in Martha's eyes. "Suddenly, a strong wind blew, and the boat capsized. I shouted desperately from the shore. But..." Her voice broke off. Michael gently squeezed his mother's hand. Martha continued in a shaky voice, "I couldn't swim. I couldn't save Carol. By the time I realized, it was too late." A heavy silence fell over the room. After a while, Sarah quietly asked, "What happened after that?" Martha heaved a deep sigh. "Our parents came back and immediately called the police and rescue teams. But Carol's body wasn't found until 3 days later. That must have been a truly painful experience," Sarah said, looking at Martha with sympathetic eyes. Martha nodded slightly. "The whole town was buzzing with rumors about us. Why did she leave her sister alone? Why didn't she help? My parents never blamed me, but I couldn't forgive myself." "So that's why you stopped talking about Carol," Michael showed understanding. "Yes. My parents tried not to mention Carol to protect me. And I found it easier that way." Martha's voice was filled with deep regret. Sarah said thoughtfully, "But by continuing to hide it, weren't you suffering even more?" Martha smiled sadly. Yes. But being able to talk about it now, I feel a little lighter. Mom, thank you for sharing these painful memories, Michael said gently. Sarah understood how important this story had been for Martha. By revealing the secret she had been keeping for years, Martha seemed to be gradually lifting the weight from her heart. However, something still nagged at Sarah's mind. There seemed to be something unnatural about Martha's story. A few days after Martha's confession, various questions were swirling in Sarah's mind. While drinking her morning coffee, she made a decision. I'm going to investigate this further. That day, Sarah headed to the local library. She wanted to check old newspaper articles and town records. Upon arriving at the library, she approached a kind-looking elderly librarian. Hello. I'd like to see records from the summer of 1973. The librarian asked with a slightly surprised look. That's quite a while ago. Any particular reason? Sarah answered, choosing her words carefully. I'm researching family history. The librarian nodded understandingly and guided Sarah to where the microfilms were kept. After hours of searching, Sarah found a local newspaper from August 1973. There was a small article. 14-year-old girl drowns in lake. Sarah's hand trembled. The article contained a brief explanation of Carol's accident. However, next to it was another article. Tragedy strikes prominent local family. This article focused more on the Harrison family's social status than on the details of the accident. Sarah frowned. Why such an article? As she dug deeper, Sarah discovered an interesting fact. After the accident, the Harrison family suddenly left town and disappeared for a while. As Sarah left the library, her head was full of questions. Why did the Harrison family leave town? And why was their social status so important? On her way home, Sarah stopped in front of an old building. It used to be the police station. Maybe. Sarah gathered her courage and went inside. It's now used as a museum, but old records might still be kept there. Luckily, a kind curator agreed to show Sarah the old police records. With nervous hands, Sarah opened the records from 1973. There, she found a shocking testimony. According to an eyewitness account, Martha had pushed Carol off the boat. Sarah gasped. No way. In her mind, all the pieces started to rapidly fall into place. Martha's guilt, the family's sudden move, the newspaper article emphasizing their social status. Everything started to make sense. Sarah rushed home. She had to tell Michael about this discovery. However, she couldn't imagine how this revelation would affect the family. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Sarah called Michael to the study. Michael felt uneasy seeing the seriousness in her expression. What's wrong, Sarah? Sarah took a deep breath and told him everything she had discovered. The police records, the eyewitness testimony, and the conclusion she had drawn from it all. Michael's face gradually turned pale. That's impossible, right? I don't want to believe it either. But the evidence is too clear, Sarah said quietly. Michael suddenly stood up and started pacing around the room. Why would Mom do such a thing? His voice was a mix of anger and confusion. Michael, calm down. Sarah put her hand on her husband's arm. How can I calm down? Michael's voice rose. Mom has been lying all this time. Aunt Carol. He choked on his words. At that moment, the door slowly opened. Martha was standing there. Her face was wet with tears. I heard everything. Martha's voice was shaking. Michael stared at his mother and said with eyes full of anger, "Is it true?" Aunt Carol. Martha slowly nodded. Yes, it's true. She collapsed into a chair. That day, I was crazy with jealousy. Seeing Carol getting close to the boy I liked. You killed your sister for such a reason. Michael shouted. Michael. Sarah tried to stop him, but it was already too late. Martha covered her face with her hands. I don't understand it myself. At that moment, my mind went blank. When I came to my senses, Carol was already in the water. She began to cry violently. A heavy silence fell over the room. Michael was shaking with anger and sadness, while Sarah looked at them both, at a loss for what to do. Now that the truth hidden for so many years had come to light, no one knew how this family should face it. The day after the truth was revealed, a heavy atmosphere hung over the Thompson household. Michael refused to speak to Martha, who had locked herself in her room. Sarah was running back and forth between family members, trying desperately to improve the situation. Michael, please. Try talking to Martha, Sarah pleaded with her husband. Michael shook his head. I can't right now. Not after. He choked on his words. At that moment, Emily entered the living room with a worried face. Dad, what's wrong with Grandma? Why does everyone look so sad? Michael and Sarah exchanged glances. Both were at a loss for words, unsure how to explain to Emily. Emily, Grandma is feeling a bit under the weather, Sarah answered gently. Emily tilted her head. But Grandma was crying. I heard her when I passed by her room. Michael inhaled sharply. Emily's innocent observation pierced his heart. Emily, you see. Sarah started to explain, but Michael raised his hand to stop her. Wait, Michael took a deep breath and said. Emily, a long time ago, Grandma experienced something very sad. She's remembering that and feeling sad about it now. Emily listened with a serious expression. Then we should comfort Grandma. Michael and Sarah stared at Emily in surprise. Emily's right, Sarah said slowly. We need to support Martha as a family. Michael remained silent, deep in thought, but eventually nodded slightly. Yes. Sarah knocked on Martha's door. Martha, Emily wants to see you. After a while, the door slowly opened. Martha's eyes were swollen from crying, but she managed a small smile when she saw Emily. Grandma, are you okay? Emily hugged Martha. Martha hugged her granddaughter back. Yes, Emily, I'm so glad you're here." Seeing this scene, Michael felt a tightness in his chest. He approached Martha and slowly extended his hand. "Mom." His voice was shaking. Martha took her son's hand, tears welling up. "Michael, I'm so sorry." Sarah felt a glimmer of hope as she watched the family come together. There was still a long road ahead, but she was certain they could move forward, one step at a time. Over the next few weeks, the Thompson family gradually walked through a healing process. Martha began seeing a psychologist, making efforts to face the guilt she had carried for years. Michael, too, though it took time, started to engage in dialogue with his mother more and more. One day after dinner, Emily suddenly asked, "Can you tell me more about Great Aunt Carol?" For a moment, the atmosphere in the room froze, but Martha slowly smiled. "Well, Carol loved music. She was always humming a tune." Emily's question became a catalyst for the family to start sharing memories of Carol. Martha talked about the fun times she had with Carol, sometimes shedding tears, but trying to accept her sister's existence positively. "Mom, I'm glad to hear about Aunt Carol," Michael said to Martha one day. "Learning about her has helped me understand you better too." Martha teared up at her son's words. "Thank you, Michael. I'm truly grateful that you've all accepted me." As Sarah watched the family's transformation, she also noticed Emily's growth. Through Carol's existence, Emily was learning about the complexity of family history and, at the same time, beginning to understand the importance of forgiveness. "Mom, people can make mistakes, but it's important to acknowledge them and apologize, right?" Emily said to Sarah one day. Sarah hugged her daughter. "That's right, Emily. And don't forget the importance of forgiveness too." At the end of summer, the Thompson family visited Carol's grave. Martha laid a bouquet on the gravestone and spoke quietly. "Carol, I'm sorry for hiding you for so long. I'll never deny your existence again." Michael placed his hand on his mother's shoulder, and Emily held Martha's hand. Seeing this scene, Sarah felt that the family bond had grown stronger through the ordeal. On the way back, Emily looked up at the sky and said, "Do you think Great Aunt Carol is watching over us?" "I'm sure she is," Martha answered gently. "And we'll keep Carol in our hearts too." The Thompson family had overcome the sorrows of the past and were bound together by new ties. They learned to accept their family history, learn from it, and become a stronger, more compassionate family.